Bill Nye the Science Guy. Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Und his lesson on sister, Kelly. Today, on Kelly the Science Lady, we will be talking about the brain. The brain. And specifically, what changes in the brain when you do a certain task, such as juggling. I'm not going to demonstrate it for you because I'm a terrible juggler, but I will talk about what changes in the brain. So when people juggle, they learn a new skill, and things in their brain change. Not necessarily forever, but they do change significantly in certain areas. The areas of the brain that change are in the temporal lobe, right here, along the sides.
Here in the video, you can see that the temporal lobes, the temporal gyri, are highlighted in purple and blue.
The temporal lobe, parts of the brain that change when people juggle, are associated with visual processing. And these areas aren't necessarily for the motor motion of juggling, but the recognition of capturing all three balls at once in your visual cortex and incorporating that into your motion areas. So when this was originally studied by a team of scientists led by a man named Draganski, Dr. Draganski, they found these changes, and they also repeated their study a couple years later and found that those changes happen almost immediately. So 7 days after starting to train a new skill, you start to show changes in your brain. And these changes, they're seen in a lot of different areas across a lot of different activities. So when elderly people exercise, their brain changes as well. Their hippocampus grows. And the hippocampus grows and actually offsets the loss that it experiences from age, which is really amazing. So start running, everybody.
Ooh, doggy, I'm ready.
Not a lot of research, though, has used randomized controlled trials to put people in a control group and an experimental group. So even though they think that there's changes in the brain associated with juggling, they're not really sure yet because they need to do a more methodologically sound research. Okay. So when we're talking about changes in the brain, I want to use this piece of paper to illustrate what happens. Because the whole brain grows. That's what they found in the juggling study. Something about the structural quality of the brain changes. But they theorized that it's not the whole brain getting bigger, which would lead to something horrible like this. Exploding, your brain does something really clever. And I'm going to illustrate it with this piece of paper. So if we fold this piece of paper a certain way, we can turn it into something. Just like when we're first learning, our brain uses neurons in a certain pattern to help us remember information or learn information. So I'm going to keep folding this piece of paper, just like the neurons in my brain connect with each other to form certain thoughts and memories. And when I'm done, I'm going to have a product. It's a new hat. But the beautiful part about the brain is that, like this piece of paper, it can reorganize itself with a little help from Kelly the Science Lady. Now, when it reorganizes itself, it uses the same materials, but in a new way. Your brain doesn't grow so big that it explodes. It's very smart about its space, and it reorganizes your neurons so that they're used in a new way. Just like I'm going to refold this piece of paper a little bit and create something completely new. Such as this little boat. Arrgh. So, your brain doesn't change forever, and it's not necessarily getting bigger, it's using its space in a different way. Now, websites like Lumosity claim that they change the brain in a similar way. Not only do they claim that they change the brain, but that they also change the brain such that you are much better at executive functioning. Now, there's some support for being better at executive functioning. Some studies have shown that. But there's not a lot of support that your brain changes as well. And of course, some people feel like you couldn't have executive functioning changes if you didn't have changes in the brain, which is legitimate. But more research is needed to show what changes in the brain according to what after you do Lumosity. The only study that's looked at brain changes in Lumosity examined how girls, females with Turner syndrome, given Lumosity for several weeks, changed before and after using fMRI. Now, they did show changes, but it was a very small sample of only 12 females, and they didn't have a control group, so definitely more research is needed. So sites like Lumosity are different from the juggling experiments that showed these changes in the temporal lobes, because sites like Lumosity have shown efficacy for changing executive functioning, but not necessarily your brain. Both involve training, and both theorize that the brain changes, but one has shown a little bit more support than the other. More research is needed. I will say, though, these Lumosity games are really fun. Words starting with yo. Yogurt. Yodel. Yoke.